We've come today to the Addison Police Department to discuss a very important topic, something that has been in the news and in media lately, and we figure that this would be a great time to sit down with members of the command staff of the Addison Police Department to talk about some of these important issues around the subject of procedural justice. And we have a number of members of the staff here. I'd like to introduce them first. We'll go around the table, and then we will begin with Director Bill Hayden. So first we have Deputy Chief of Police Roy Selvig, Director of Police Bill Hayden, Officer and Clia Accreditation Manager Eric Brandt, and Deputy Chief Sean Gilhooly. So gentlemen, thank you all for joining us today. Thanks for allowing us to come in and talk about this very important topic. Director Hayden, let's start off with you. Before we get into some of the procedures and the policies that are in place here around this topic of procedural justice, I know you would like to, on behalf of the police department and the community, address some of these issues that have been coming to light lately and some of the concerns that you have around them. So I wanted to give you that opportunity at this time to do that.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate that. Yeah, we all know that in the last 3 weeks or so, there's been a lot going on around the nation, especially after the unfortunate circumstances that occurred in Minnesota. I want everyone to know that the men and women of the Addison Police Department do not condone what happened in Minnesota. Actually, we wish it never happened. Absolutely wish it did not happen, but it did. But I can say with confidence that it will not happen here. It has never happened here, and it will not happen here. We have a lot of programs and training, and we do a lot of things to prevent things like that from happening. We actually have a very caring police department. We reach out to our community. We talk to our citizens. We have good, positive citizen contacts. We have a great department. And I want to make a statement to the great residents of the village of Addison. Men and women of the Addison Police Department are not a part of this alleged systemic problem in law enforcement that people are complaining about today. We're not, and I can honestly say that in DuPage County, I'm familiar with a lot of the other police departments in DuPage County as well as the Sheriff's Department. I can't think of anyone that's part of this alleged systemic problem in law enforcement. Actually, in my personal opinion, there is no systemic problem in law enforcement. 99% of the law enforcement officers in this nation are great police officers. The police departments are great police departments. We care about people. You hear about a few of the unfortunate circumstances like in Minnesota. Like I said, wish it never happened. But we all pay the price for that, and it's just not right. Addison, as you know, is a very diverse community. We've grown up in a diverse community. I've been here 41 years. I'm very familiar with this community and how it's grown up and our diversity and our interaction. And I had a resident say to me the other day that we are a small community with a big city feel because we all know each other and we all take care of each other. And that came from a citizen in town. You know, our village board, the mayor, the board, the village manager, on down, through all the department heads, Don, you know this. They provide us with the training dollars to bring good programs to the village of Addison and to the Addison Police Department. We have a lot of good training that's aimed at diversity. It's aimed at discrimination, procedural justice, accreditation, in-car cameras. The equipment is second to none. And we share certain principles throughout the village, and it includes community policing, continued development of ongoing relationships between law enforcement and the citizens of Addison, and the citizens who pass through, and the business people in Addison. And we use a lot of de-escalation techniques. You've heard that word regularly lately. We have been using de-escalation techniques for years and years and years. Our policies, a lot of things that people are talking about today, our policies have stated those things for over 20 plus years. We're an accredited agency. We have first line supervisors on all the time, every single shift, every single day. And those supervisors respond to all the critical calls for service. They're there, they take control, they supervise. They look over that situation. And we hold them responsibility for what they do and how they lead their men and women. And they do a damn good job at it. And they also randomly review the in-car cameras. And I say randomly, not just for specific incidents, but they will randomly pick up tape and they'll review it to see how our police officers are acting and what they're doing out there.
And if I can interject for a moment, Director, in-car cameras was something that the police department kind of led the way on, and it really helps not only the issue about how the arrest or how the incident may have taken place, but it also helps the officers. So they're able to show that they did conform to policy for the department.
It absolutely does. In fact, we had this equipment in place before communities were even calling for it. And what we quickly discovered was that it benefits us. And the officers appreciate those in-car cameras because they do act according to law. They do take care of people. They do use procedural justice. They respect people. So those cameras actually benefit our officers. We want them. So we use them. Also, we're members of the Metropolitan Emergency, I gotta look at it here, the Metropolitan Emergency Response Investigative Team. It's a team of officers in DuPage County that is assigned to independently investigate officer-involved shootings or death of people while interacting with the police. It's an independent body. We've been doing these things for years. This isn't anything new to us. All of this has been in place. So I want to go back. We don't have these systemic problems in law enforcement in Addison or in any other departments that I know of. And I actually take exception to that statement. It's actually wrong to condemn all of law enforcement for the actions of a few that should have been gone long ago. So, as you know, over the past couple of weeks, there have been protests all over the place. We've had them here in Addison. And of course, I was listening to them, I was out there, I watched them. And as unusual as it might sound, the protesters had commented that they grew up in Addison. They've lived here many, many years in different circumstances. And they actually complimented the Addison Police Department by saying that they've never had a bad interaction with the Addison Police Department. The protesters said that. So I think it gives us a lot of credit, and I thank them for doing that.
And did you also now make sure that the organizers of those gathering events were also kept safe to make sure the entire event was kept safe, both from the public who attended as well as the people who were organizing the event, so there weren't any additional problems that might have come as a result of their having an event of a rally or any type of gathering? We
did. We protected their First Amendment rights. Actually, we reached out to them before their event, and we talked and we worked with each other. It's part of our programs to reach out to the people of the village of Addison. And we did. We talked to the protesters, and they had what I would characterize as a successful event. I want people to know that in Addison, people are safe, and they don't have to be afraid to interact with us. And they'll get a good positive response from us. And as leaders right here at this table, we know we have that responsibility to enhance our profession, to uphold the highest standards in policing. And we've been doing that, and I promise you we will continue to do it. And what's needed now, in my opinion, we need to bring law enforcement and the communities even closer together. We've been doing it for many years, but I can see now there's a couple issues. People are asking questions. And we'll go over a number of those things, but okay, maybe it's time again we even become a little bit closer. So I would like that. So actually I asked my staff to sit down with me and go over a few things with you for our citizens, and we could sit here and roundtable.
Absolutely, thank you. And so let's begin with Officer Brandt, who manages something called the Clia Accreditation, and we've heard about Clia now for at least the last 20 years that I know of. Officer Brandt, can you talk a little bit about what Clia is and why does that act as a foundation for some of these programs that we're going to be talking about today?
Absolutely. CLIA actually stands for the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. They're a credentialing authority based in the United States, They, with a primary focus on law enforcement. There's approximately 1,100 standards that we, as one of their agencies, need to meet, as well as all the other agencies. We need to meet those annually and show them that we're doing that. The police departments are assessed by both a web-based program as well as by them sending a team of representatives to our police department every 3 years and going through our files, books, reports, reviewing everything that we've done and making sure that we do meet their standards. The Addison Police Department's been accredited with Clia since the year 2000. We've also been accredited as a gold standard agency since 2015. The Addison Police Department is the 5th agency in the state of Illinois to receive that, and the gold standard is the highest honor that Clia has.
Is there an opportunity that the public also gets involved? I understand that you have the assessors, the accreditors who come in and actually take a look at what's going on from their perspective because they work in other law enforcement agencies. But what about for the general public who wants to give a comment regardless of how it may go? Do they also have the opportunity to participate in the accreditation process?
Yes, they do. When we're having an open assessment with the assessors on scene, there will be a phone-in time due to the COVID situation going on right now, or they have an actual kind of like a town hall meeting where individuals from the community are invited in to say what they feel about the police department. And the team of assessors sits and listens to every one of their phone calls or talks to them in person.
And that accreditation, Director, you might want to comment on this. The accreditation really, if you've got something like that, you have made, as a department, you've made steps towards being able to mitigate some of these problems that might have happened with other departments. In other words, that accreditation, just to say it's a gold standard is one thing, but to actually stand behind it and know that you have done all of the 400 and some different criteria that are listed in there really speaks volumes for what you're able to do as a department when you do have to interact with the community.
It's a very strenuous program. And like Eric was saying, they bring in independent, objective assessors. They're not from Addison. They're not from the state of Illinois. We don't know each other. And they have nothing to lose by saying, you didn't fulfill this and you did a good job here. They put it all on the line. Now, I really think that if all these agencies across the nation were accredited, Clia accredited, we wouldn't be talking about this right now today. We wouldn't have had those problems because they would have discovered a lot of issues that they would have had to address in order to maintain accreditation before those things even happened.
So you're a believer?
Strong believer, absolutely.
Right. Deputy Chief Selvik, let's talk about some of the policies and training that go into when officers have to encounter citizens, a subject, no matter what it is. And the first one we can talk about is, what would you say would be some of the training methods that are used for officers when they do have to go in and de-escalate an altercation with a subject? In other words, whatever the situation might be, but they encounter a subject who may have to be taken into custody, but there's a problem before that all happens, the person's uncooperative, however it might go. What's some of the training that you would be able to share with our viewers that officers go through for that process?
So de-escalation, Don, as Director Hayden mentioned, it's a term that you hear quite a lot lately in modern policing. It does not involve officers putting themselves at additional unnecessary risk than they already have to. What de-escalation encompasses is a lot of training, a lot of techniques, a lot of additional tools at their disposal that allow them to try to minimize or decrease the potential for a situation to turn into a force type incident. Officers are faced every single day with life-threatening cases, with people that want to do them harm, want to do the public harm, want to do others harm. And a lot of these cases can or have the potential to result in a force incident. What de-escalation does is it takes a large percentage of those and it allows the officer to maintain control of it, but then try to work through a lot of their tools and their training to talk this person down, to work it to a peaceful resolution without having to get to that point. I'll give you an example. You know, we do a lot of scenario-based training. We have state certified instructors that are trained by the best in the nation, including de-escalation. So these instructors will then form scenarios that we put our officers into with role players, and they have to act out these types of incidents. For an example, one that we recently did was we'll put officers into a scenario where an offender or a suspect who has committed a violent act has now barricaded themselves in a location where they are only a harm to themselves. There's nobody else in there. Now, officers are trained to work with this person. They have time on their side, they have resources, they have money. Everything will be exhausted before they try to force that confrontation to go in and arrest this person. All of this is designed to try to minimize that impact on the offender or the suspect and avoid that violent confrontation.
And this training goes on a regular basis where you're able to work with the officers. Does it happen on an annual or semi-annual? How often would you characterize something like this happens on a training basis?
I'd say it happens daily. Our training starts with the academy. They work their way through the academy. Then we don't stop there. When the officers get here, we take them to even further levels of training, and our certifications go above and beyond what the state expects. We have annual training, written tests, demonstrations of proficiency. We have monthly training that is documented and required. But we also have daily training that begins with roll calls, with instructors taking it upon themselves to constantly teach officers current trends with policing, modern policing, de-escalation techniques, the latest and greatest to keep them up to date and constantly thinking.
Officer Brian, let's talk a little bit about what happens when an officer has to encounter a subject and perhaps needs to put their hands upon the subject, whatever it might be. What are the policies that are in place that would protect the subject, not only when that type of a encounter would happen, but also if they needed to be transported, taken into custody, put into a squad car and so on? Can you give us some idea on what some of your policies are regarding
Absolutely.
that?
There's several different policies for the levels of procedural justice. What's more than likely going to happen is they're probably going to be placed in handcuffs. Something that will not happen, though, based on the Addison Police Department's policies, is there will not be any chokeholds. There also will not be any hog tying of the individuals. After they're placed in the handcuffs, they're going to be secured in the back of a Addison Police Department vehicle. They're going to be seated in an upright position, assisted into the car, seated in an upright position, and then transported to the destination that we need to go to.
Deputy Chief Gilhooly, let's talk a little bit about what happens when other officers are involved at an incident where someone needs to be taken into custody. They may not necessarily be the officer that's doing the direct contact with the subject at the time, but they're there because they responded. What is the responsibility that those officers have were they to see something that is not in accordance with department or your law enforcement policy? What's the onus on those other officers if something were to happen and they witness it and maybe it's not in accordance with your policy? How would you handle the case of those officers in a situation like that?
Well, Don, the onus is on those officers there. They do have to intervene, and that is one of our policies and procedures if they witness an officer using excessive force. If the policy is not adhered to, we will have an internal investigation. The chief of police will order an internal investigation. We'll look into it. If it is sustained or substantiated that actually excessive force was used, we'll have discipline. Now, the discipline could range from informal discipline to training. It could lead to maybe a letter of reprimand to termination. It depends on the totality of the circumstances. Many factors play into it.
But the important thing, and I think a lot of viewers will understand what we're talking about here, is if there are other officers involved, they are just as culpable, that's a good term to use, that they need to be on top of what's going on in addition to the officer that may actually be initiating the arrest, for example.
100%.
Okay. Deputy Chief Selvig, let's now talk a little bit about some of the issues that come up when a weapon needs to be used in the case of dealing with a procedural justice matter and you need to take someone into custody. What are some of the levels of policy that are in place with regard to any type of weapon that's used, and then of course the training that goes along with that in case you need to interact with someone in the public because you need to be taking them into custody? How would you characterize some of the training policies you have with that?
So unfortunately, in this profession, there is the existence for force to occur. Whenever de-escalation does not work because an offender takes it to another level and officers are required to use force either to get to an arrest or to resolve an incident, to safeguard life or property, some level of force is needed. So our use of force policy is very, very extensive. Or the training our officers go through is very, very extensive. Now, we're very fortunate in the village of Addison. Our board has recognized this and has bought the latest and greatest equipment and outfitted our officers with the training and the equipment necessary to exhaust every single avenue that they possibly can before it gets to a higher level of force. Our use of force policy is basically a guide for officers to use the level of force at a bare minimum necessary to effect that arrest or to safeguard someone's life. Now within there is a lot of tools that we give them. Every single piece of equipment, every tool, every weapon that the officer uses, and that's including their hands and limbs. They go through training starting in the academy. Every piece of equipment is then issued in proficiency, demonstrated, written tests over and over, every single month, every single year we document, and they have to show and they have to prove to a certified instructor that they are proficient with not just the policy, but with this equipment also. From there, we then will instruct them to use just the amount necessary to effect that arrest. Now, what that means is, and there's just kind of this public perception, a little bit of this continuum, where if a person on the street brandishes a baseball bat, well then the officer should brandish a baton because they should meet that level. They have the training and ability, and we're kind of at a disadvantage because there's this idea that officers can perform these incredible feats and just take this person into custody by using just their baton against somebody armed with a baseball bat. It's not reality. It just doesn't happen. There's a lot of things that play into effect here, and part of that is size disparity, skill disparity, things like that. For example, if an officer, say a 50-year-old officer who weighs 120 pounds shows up on a call, and all of a sudden they're confronted with a violent offender who's a 25-year-old, 250-pound MMA fighter. Well, the officer's automatically at a disadvantage, age, size, skill level. So it's not feasible for that officer to try to meet whatever level of resistance that they're getting from this offender. They may have to take it up the scale a little bit. So all of this is designed, again, with safety in mind for the officer, but also to try to minimize that force level that the officer has to use to effect that arrest.
What type of reporting does the officer have to undertake then in the event that they have to put any type of force upon a subject? Do they have to document that? And if so, how does that get done, and who reviews something like that?
So every single use of force incident is documented by the officer or officers involved. Those reports are then reviewed by a safety committee, or by the director of police to ensure compliance, no excessive force was used, everything was within the bounds of our policy, within the law. We actually take the documentation a step further. The Addison Police Department has recognized that even just the display of a weapon to gain compliance with someone is by law a use of force. So we've recently taken our reporting requirements further in saying that an officer so much as displays a weapon to gain compliance from a subject, feeling that their life and the life of someone else may be in danger, that requires documentation as well.
What if there's a medical situation involved while you're taking the person into custody, or once they've been put into custody? If there's any type of issue with them, health and safety, does that have to get reported also?
Absolutely, absolutely. The officers know that if an incident leads to a force and they have to take someone into custody, their job does not stop there. The second the incident is over and it's contained, if there's any type of injury that was sustained out of that encounter, then their immediate response is to provide medical attention and call an ambulance right away. By policy and by training, our officers are all proficient with recognizing if there's an injury that someone has sustained, if someone is reporting to them that they're injured, if they have shortness of breath, if they have head and neck pain, any type of pain anywhere, there is no hesitation. The officer will notify the on-duty sergeant and will contact medical aid right away.
If I could comment about that, I just want to explain use of force. The citizens, I want them to clearly understand that use of force, it's a broad spectrum, and it begins with hands-on. So even in those situations where we have say a call of a CIT, mental health person who needs assistance, and we're going to help them to the ambulance, and we take hold of their arms. That's a use of force report. We review absolutely everything.
You have to.
So, and then it's a much broader spectrum, all the way on up to deadly force.
Director Hayden, as we're talking now, talk about the various levels of background and testing and evaluation that goes into hiring a brand new police officer as a candidate to be a police officer in the department. In fact, I know currently right now you're seeking candidates for the position of patrol officer, and this has got to be a very critical time to be hiring and make sure that you're hiring the right men and women to do the job like that. Can you talk about some of the process that a candidate for patrol officer would go through before they're hired, and then even beyond once they get into the academy, as was mentioned a moment ago?
Okay. For a number of years, the number of recruits or number of people who are applying for police officer positions has not been the same as in the past. Very low numbers, actually. So a lot of departments took the approach that, well, maybe we should lower some of our standards and we'll recruit more people that way. And they did. But actually, we never reduced our standards, and we will not reduce our standards. So it starts with a written test. Everyone takes a written test, and then from there, there's a physical fitness test. Actually, according to the state of Illinois, police officers have to perform certain minimum physical standards to be a police officer. Then following that, we start to get into the meat of the background, which is the background investigation. So we're talking fingerprints. Those get sent in to see if the person has a criminal history. We do neighborhood interviews. So wherever that candidate lived, we're going to go out and we're going to talk to their neighbors. And wherever they previously lived, we're going to go talk to their neighbors again. We're going to go talk to their present and former employers. And when we're out there talking to those employers, we're going to ask to see that candidate's original employment application for the business we're at. And we're going to look at that previous employment application to find out if it matches what the candidate put on the present application for the Addison Police Department. And then we're going to follow up on that and talk to some of those people. They have to do an 8-hour ride-along with a detective. Now, our detectives, they're skilled interviewers. They find out a lot about those candidates at the time of that ride-along. We want to be completely familiar with the people we are hiring. We contact the law enforcement agencies and all their previous addresses. So if you list an address in Addison, but you went to college down in Southern or Eastern or wherever it might be out in California, we contact those local law enforcement agencies to find out if that candidate had any contacts in any way whatsoever in those jurisdictions. And following that, there's a police commission interview. There's a complete psychological test. The psychological tests are very, very, very in-depth. So we follow up with that. Complete medical, including the drug screens. Then from there, we send them to the Suburban Law Enforcement Academy at the College of DuPage. That's a 14-week school. And every single day, they're monitored. They have to take a weekly test. They must pass those weekly tests. And then at the end of the course, they must also pass a state certification exam. So, you know, things don't get easier for them as things progress. You know, you got the job, but then it really starts to become really hard for them. Following that, there's rigorous training here at the Addison Police Department. So now they just went to 14 weeks of classroom formal training. Now they're going to come back. They're going to come back for another week of training here at the Addison Police Department. We're going to give them weekly tests on all our critical incident policies. So our use of force and procedural justice, firearms. They have to demonstrate proficiency, take a written test. They have to pass it, including the practical test, before they even get inside the squad car. And then from there, it's 16 weeks of training in the car with a field training officer. And then that officer is still on probation for an 18-month period of time. There's monthly evaluations after that, meets with the supervisors, field training officers who continue to follow that officer to calls to see how he's handling them. It's a very aggressive, very rigorous program for someone to pass, all the way from that first written test
All right.
to making
So this could be
probation.
several months.
It's going to be 6 months
time.
minimum,
Yeah.
6 months.
All right. Deputy Chief Gilhooly, talk about what happens when there is any type of use of force that goes outside of the policies and procedures that we've learned about today, and an officer gets involved in that. What types of things do you have to do proactively to address that situation if they were to go outside of the policies of the department?
At the Addison Police Department, we have an early identification system, also known as the EIS. So each month we get a report from HR, the department, and they'll advise us the number of use of reports an officer has, the number of traffic crashes they've been involved in, written discipline they may have received throughout the year, and substandard activity reports, and the first line supervisors would be aware of that. So we kind of monitor that a little bit. We take several corrective measures when dealing with that too. First thing would be is for the supervisors to approach the officer and kind of delve in a little bit and see what's going on. We have a stressful time, and particularly now, this has been pretty tough on our profession. I've been a police counselor, a peer support member for 10 years. So I understand what these guys are going through and gals are going through. But we do have a peer support team at the Addison Police Department that we just initiated in January. So we'll reach out to the guys, and they might have issues going on at home or through work. We also have an EAP program, Employee Assistance Program, in addition to the Northern Illinois Critical Stress Management Team. So if it's an issue they have plenty of avenues to get counseling and get the proper help they need. We'll also maybe look into a performance improvement plan. What they'll do with that is meet with the sergeant weekly to discuss their activity, to discuss what's going on, and they'll be closely monitored throughout that time, and that can last anywhere from, let's say, a month to a couple months, depending on how the officer's progressing. If that's not working, maybe it's training or lack thereof. So we might want to send the officer to additional training. A lot of times when the officers have more training, they have more confidence and their performance goes up. Now, if all that fails and nothing's working, it might have to lead to discipline, but we want to look into the problem before.
Officer Brandt, let's talk about an issue that could be very serious, and that would be if there was any use of force that would be of a deadly nature while somebody might be being taken into custody. What type of reporting would be required for something like that in the department?
As of yet, there have been no in-custody deaths resulting from the use of force with the Addison Police Department. If an in-custody death would occur, it would be investigated by MERIT. That's the Metropolitan Emergency Response and Investigation Team. They're a DuPage County Task Force, previously mentioned by Director Hayden. Also, DuPage County State's Attorney Office, as well as the Illinois Department of Corrections. Also, whenever there's any sort of issue that threatens either the facility or any persons that would be within the facility, there's a separate reporting form that has to be completed for the Illinois Department of Corrections, and that has to be forwarded to them within 72 hours for their review.
Dr. Hayden, let's conclude by having some comments from you. And how can the public get more educated, get more involved, even just access some of the reports, if that's even possible, the reports that might be available where the public could look into some of the areas that we've discussed in our roundtable discussion today?
Well, we've had our reports available, but most importantly, the other day we watched our president sign an executive order demanding criminal justice reform, and in there he identified a number of issues moving forward where there will be reform nationwide, and it's about time. Because for years, we have had all that information available online. You can go to our website, you can look at our annual reports, you can look at our use of force issues, you can look at our policies and procedures, our training. So I would suggest, that people, if they want to become involved, they should take the time, they should go online, they should look at our information. And if they have more questions, they can always call us. They can get involved in our citizen police academies. They can become a volunteer. We would like to establish a better relationship with everyone, and the best way to do that is to educate yourself. So I strongly suggest that, and we will continue to reach out to our community citizens, partners.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for the time you spent talking with us today on this very important topic, the topic of procedural justice here at the Addison Police Department. And our guests have been Deputy Chief Roy Selvig, Director of Police Bill Hayden, Officer and Clia Accreditation Manager Eric Brandt, and Deputy Chief Sean Gilhooly. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks, Tom.